All right, I've got here with me Dean Legge from dogpost.com, and we are going to be talking about the Georgia-South Carolina matchup this weekend. Dean, how you doing?
Good, I'm here. How are you?
I'm doing good too. I'm ready to get talking about these teams. Now, Georgia seems like they're picking up right where they left off last year. I mean, 2 games under their belt, looking great. What are you seeing so far? What are you liking from this team?
Well, they scored a bunch of points the first game. They didn't score as much in the second, which was against an FCS opponent. They've been better on defense, I think, than a lot of folks suspected they would be. But offensively, certainly in the first game, that was just really impressive how well they played against Oregon.
Yeah, they really seem to appear capable of defending their national championship title. Is that kind of what the sentiment is like there in Athens?
Well, um, not from inside the program necessarily. They're doing their usual sandbagging, but I think folks have picked up that um, Georgia is in a pretty good position heading into the first game of the conference. And I mean, I was telling folks over the summer that it wouldn't be shocking if they won the national championship. It would be surprising because anytime you win the national championship, that's not an easy thing to accomplish. But it did look like they had the guys that you needed to perform at a high level. And so far this season, they've looked pretty good. And part of it, too, as you know, Kennedy, is when you've got teams who have had a hard time, like Ohio State and Alabama, who are considered, you know, formidable opponents for the Dogs, that makes it look like Georgia's further along, perhaps, than they really are.
Yeah, and if that team was able to accomplish that after losing so many great players to the draft last year, I think that would be pretty historic. So, first
Yeah.
matchup of the SEC this weekend against South Carolina. How do these two teams match up?
Well, not well for South Carolina, unfortunately for them. I mean, I thought Carolina played pretty well against Arkansas in the middle part of the game. But, in the 8 quarters of football, South Carolina has really not played great in that time. Georgia State was beating them in the third quarter. Georgia State is not a great team. North Carolina beat them pretty solidly a week ago. They had to use 2 block punts to get going for touchdowns. South Carolina did that. That's a pretty amazing accomplishment, actually. But Georgia has played South Carolina for decades. Then they came into the league. When they got into the league, the game became more difficult for Georgia. South Carolina and Columbia has become much more of a known as a snake pit for Georgia. Hard to get out of there with wins, but they're 10-5 in 15 games in Columbia over the last 30 years. So Georgia usually expects a tough fight when they go to Columbia, but they haven't lost there since 2014.
Yeah, and they Georgia had a great on the road record last season, so I feel like that's no real struggle for them. So, after seeing what Arkansas did to this team last week, are Coach Smart and this offense really just chomping at the bit to run through this South Carolina defense?
So run is the number one word there. Georgia has been a bit spotty with the run. They've been very effective with certain players, but they were not great in the red zone last week. That's not all against the run. But Kendall Milton, who has been the number 2 running back, he's starting to pick up steam. He's going for 8.5 yards a carry a week ago. South Carolina really, really struggles stopping the run, giving up 250 yards a game. That's not going to work. Now, Georgia's not like they were a year ago, and they're not like they were with Nick Chubb and Sony Michelle and guys like that. They're much more predicated on the pass. But I wouldn't want to say I have to stop Georgia's run game because the offensive line is very good, and I think it's not a great matchup for Carolina.
So, what kind of challenges do you think Spencer Rattler poses for this Bulldog defense?
Well, he's got to play discipline. I mean, you saw him at OU, and he was kind of up and down there. At Carolina, he's been fine so far. He can really throw. He can really run. He has the capability of being really good, but he needs help, and he also needs to not make mistakes. It's not easy playing quarterback in this league, and for Spencer Rattler, um, playing Arkansas and Georgia back to back, that's about as physical as it's going to get. But it's just tough when you don't, when you don't have a lot of time. It's hard in athletics when you don't have space and time. You don't have space and time, stuff gets really tough. And I think that's going to be a challenge for him this weekend.
Yeah, this is the SEC. There's no room for mistakes around here. So
No.
Kirby Smart said that this game against Samford really wasn't a good measuring stick for them, and that he
Mhm.
thinks that his team needs to improve in every facet of the game. So has that kind of been the message and vibe around there this week?
Well, it's Kirby Smart, so this is what he's gonna do. He's not wrong, but he usually does this after Georgia plays teams that are not on kind of on their level, for lack of a better term. I mean, it wasn't a league game. He's acknowledging in an offhand way that they didn't do some things as well as they would have liked. But they were up 30 to nothing at the half, and they just weren't as crisp as maybe they usually are. The things they need to improve on, I think defensively, it's hard to say they've got a ton. They've allowed 3 points in 2 games. On the offensive side of the ball, there were touchdowns there to be had, and they just didn't score them. I think it's just as simple as, you know, score touchdowns, don't kick field goals, and there wouldn't be a lot to complain about. But it wouldn't be Kirby Smart without the needling of his team.
Right. Well, great stuff. Thanks so much for joining us. That was Dean Legge with dogpost.com.